the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, this is Owen Bennett-Jones with NewsHour. And today, after WikiLeaks, a banking leak, the Australian journalist who ended up with thousands of names of people with money in offshore tax havens.
Most of these tax havens are former British colonies, if you notice the pattern. And so all the money's going back to the City of London.
We look back in history for the reasons for North Korean hostility to the United States.
The Americans leveled the country. About 85% of the structures were burnt. Now, that's a long time ago, but in North Korea time, that war happened yesterday.
Also today, how bad news on the internet never goes away, and we'll take a look at Oliver Stone's version of American history. And first, a bulletin of the latest world news.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has urged North Korea to tone down its nuclear threats. Speaking at a news conference in Madrid, Mr. Ban said that nuclear threats were not a game. From the Spanish capital, here's Tom Burridge.
Reacting to the latest threats from North Korea towards both South Korea and the United States, the United Nations General Secretary Ban Ki-moon said the situation had become really alarming and troubling. He said that North Korea had gone too far and warned that any miscalculation could lead to a very grave outcome. Earlier, a spokesman for the Russian Foreign Ministry said North Korea's decision to pursue nuclear status radically complicated efforts to restart the so-called six-party talks.
The United Nations is suspending all its food distribution centres in the Gaza Strip after demonstrators, angry at budget cuts, stormed one of its compounds. It follows a series of violent protests throughout the week. The UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which gives aid to about 800,000 Palestinians in Gaza, described it as a dramatic and disturbing escalation. The UN said it understood the anger at reductions in cash payments to some of Gaza's poorest families and was trying to mitigate the effects. A French court has found Air France guilty of discrimination for removing a pro-Palestinian activist from a flight to Israel. The activist wasn't allowed to board the plane because she wasn't Israeli or Jewish. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
The incident happened during what was dubbed by the media the fly-tiller, when hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists sought to fly to Tel Aviv airport and then to make their way to the occupied West Bank. Horia Ankour was one who tried to fly from Nice, but shortly before takeoff she was asked by a member of the aircrew if she was Jewish or Israeli, and when she said no, she was asked to leave the plane. The prosecution said it was a clear-cut case of racial discrimination, and the judge agreed, finding Air France guilty and fining it €10,000 or $13,000.
Facebook has released a new piece of software that it hopes will put the social network at the center of smartphones that run Google's Android operating system. It's designed to make Facebook the home screen of mobile phones rather than one of the many apps you have to click on. Facebook's founder is Mark Zuckerberg.
So let's say you're waiting in line at the grocery store and you look down and you see these beautiful immersive updates of your friend finishing a bike race or your family cooking a meal together or news from your favorite sports team. You might have missed these otherwise if you had to go into an app to see them. But with Home, they're brought right in front of you.
Correspondents say Facebook is trying to tap into the rapid growth in users who access social media from smartphones and tablets rather than desk-based computers, sales of which are dropping. World news from the BBC. The new president of the Central African Republic says he accepts the conclusions of an emergency summit in Chad, where regional leaders said they wouldn't recognize his new government. The meeting called on Michel Djotodia to organize a national transitional council and fresh elections within 18 months. When his rebel forces deposed the CAR president Francois Bozizé 2 weeks ago, Mr. Djotodia said he would only hand over power after 3 years. Police in the central Indian state of Chhattisgarh say a villager has murdered 4 women and 5 girls with an axe. The children were aged between 2 and 9 years old. Police say the attacker, now under arrest, had been mentally disturbed since his wife left him. The assault happened in the afternoon when women and children from several families had gathered in one home. Scientists in Switzerland have found that a breath test could be just as useful as a blood sample in helping to diagnose a disease. Jason Palmer has more.
Researchers studied 11 subjects across 9 days, analyzing their breath using what's called a mass spectrometer. The team found that the components in each sample were unique to individuals and didn't change over time. That means a simple and instantaneous breath test could replace blood or urine sampling in the future. But the technique published today has the potential to become a much more general diagnostic. And it could become part of what's been called personalized medicine, treatments and drug regimens specifically tailored to our personal chemistry.
7 football players from the Argentine club Arsenal have returned home from an eventful match in Brazil, during which they scuffled with police and spent part of the night in jail. The row broke out after their 5-2 defeat in South America's Copa Libertadores to Atlético Mineiro in the Brazilian city of Belo Horizonte. Television pictures showed some players attacking police officers and throwing objects at the referees. The club was fined about $20,000. BBC News.
This is Owen Bennett-Jones with NewsHour, and coming up later in the programme, it is a man's world in Formula One, but maybe that's changing.
I never had